The way of the Rebbe to make a kינוס תורה in Isru Chag, even though we are a few days after Isru Chag, it's B'yomim Asmuchim. There's quite a few times that the Kviyas was before Shabbos or Erev Shabbos or Shabbos, and the Rebbe said we can do it also in the Yomim Asmuchim, and for sure everybody was by the Rebbe, and the Elom just now starting to come back, so we'll make this kינוס תורה for Isru Chag Hein. We have the honor today to have from the Rosh Yeshivas, from Yeshiva Gdeile, bei uns da, Harav HaChosid, Harav Israel Kaplan, machen uns geben Chidushe Teira vor dem kינוס תורה. We'd like everybody to please be quiet and listen. Maybe we can talk in English.
Oh, yeah, of course we say English. I can't do it Yiddish. Okay. From here. Okay, so we're learning this year in the Yeshiva, we're learning Mesechtes Baba Kama. And so I'm going to speak a few in Yonim, then I'm going to get Mesechtes Baba Kama. General in Yonim, and Ayin, which is going to get to the beginning of the Gemara Mesechtes Baba Kama. I'm going to try to divide up this presentation, if you want to call it, into three parts. First, I want to talk about the Isser Lahazik, the Isser on a person not to damage another person's property. And then I want to talk later about the Tashlumin. What is the nature of when a person's property pays? What is the nature? Why is it that he has to pay up? Obviously, I'm going to explain the nafkaminas between the different ifanim that we could learn. And then the third Indian that I want to talk about is a little bit when I get to the beginning of the Gemara, where the Gemara discusses the concept of Aves and Tuldis. When I get the Shabbos and the Zikin, the different Inyanim. So firstly, I'm going to start with the Rambam. The Rambam says in the beginning of Hilchos Niskei Mammon, not at the beginning of Parakeh, the beginning of Parakeh, the Rambam says the following. He says that you have an animal that was pasturing, and it left its normal place of pasturing, and it went into various fields and vineyards, even though it did not damage yet. In other words, it went out of its zone that it belongs, even though it did not yet damage. We warn the owners 3 times. We give them a warning that they should protect their animal and guard it from not going in the wrong places. And if the owner did not protect his animal and he did not prevent it from going astray into the wrong places, then the owner of the field which it's coming into has permission to actually shecht this animal. He could shecht it. Obviously, shchita ksheira, the Rambam says. And he says to the owners, come and sell the flesh of your animal. Why? He says, so explains the Rambam, it is forbidden for a person to damage, like al derech, like you're not allowed to do it to damage and have in mind that if it will damage, I'll pay. Even to be goyim, indirectly cause something to damage, it is forbidden even to do that, saying in mind that you're going to pay. In other words, there would have been a hava amina. I would have thought that perhaps a person could allow this animal to, if this owner would be allowed to really essentially let his animal roam free, he could say, I'm allowing it to roam free, and what's the big deal? If it will damage, I take full responsibility, I'll pay you, I'll give the compensation, right? There is such a havamina to say that there really isn't an isser, it's not forbidden to allow his animal to go and damage, because he could say, if it will damage, what do you care? I'll compensate, I'll give you full compensation. There is such a havamina. But the Rambam comes and says that no, it's asr to be mazik. It is forbidden to damage. And the extent, that's the first thing the Rambam teaches us. Number one, that there is an isr to damage. And the second thing the Rambam teaches us is that the extent of this isr is that it includes not only direct damages, but even indirectly, what's called grama, to be goyrem nezik, to indirectly cause something to damage, that's also forbidden. Now we can use the example of the Rambam himself to discuss this concept of grama, but for a reason I'm going to explain soon, I'm going to choose a different example to talk about grama. The classic example of grama would be, for instance, where you have somebody who's throwing outside of his window, he's throwing down kalim, he's throwing down, let's say, utensils made out of glass, right? And he placed on the bottom, some cushions, right, or pillows, to receive that the kalim should fall on the cushions and the pillows and shouldn't break, and someone else goes and grabs away and takes away those karamuksasis. He takes away the pillows and the cushions, right? Thereby causing that whatever is thrown out should break. That's the classic example of grama, right? Indirectly causing a damage, meaning this person didn't go and take the other person's kalim and break it biyadayim with his hands, but indirectly he removed that which would have protected it, and he indirectly caused it to be destroyed. And so the Rambam says that that's also considered included in this Isser. It's also forbidden. So you're forbidden to go and with your hands break someone else's kalim. That's direct. That's asr lahazik. But also grama is also considered asr lahazik. So now this is basically the consensus that there is an Isser lahazik, although there may be opinion that says that no, but this is the consensus, right? Now there's a question. The question is where we learn this from. Where do we know that there's an Isser lahazik? Where in the Torah, where does it say in the Torah that it's asr lahazik? So there's many different views, ranging from all the way from the Rishonim, the earliest Rishonim, until the latest Achrayim. So one Rishon I think says that, I think the Yad Ramah says that it's v'hafta l'recha kamaycha, it's included in v'hafta l'recha kamaycha. Others say that it's learned from a Mikol Shekin, from a Hashavas Aveda. If you have to return the lost object, for sure you're not allowed to be good and that he should lose. There's different views. But, and then there's even the most recent, the most recent view that's discussed in the yeshivas a lot is from the Birkas Shmuel or Baruch Ber, who is the Talmud of Reb Chaim Brisker, and he says that in the Torah, in the Parsha, where the Torah discusses the concept of shar shenagach, an animal that gores, the Torah says, "V'lo yishmerenu ba'alav," right? That it's the fault of the owner for not protecting it. Mashma, from here we could understand that it's incumbent on the owner to protect it. So it's not clearly stated in the Torah, but by implication, that's all what everyone else says. But I think that there's a Rabbeinu Yaina in the beginning of Pirkei Avos, and Rabbeinu Yaina says Moshe Kibbutz Torah Mesinai, and he discusses the idea of Torah Sheba'al Peh. That Torah Sheba'al Peh is an interpretation of Torah Sheba'ksav, and without Torah Sheba'al Peh we would not have the correct understanding of Torah Sheba'ksav. And he says that, he gives an example. He says, for example, when it comes to Leisigzo, he says this very ba'avla, it's almost even hard to, you read it so quickly, you might miss what he says. But he says that, for example, when it comes to Leisigzo, right, the meaning of Peter, if you read just Torah Sheba'ksav, what does Leisigzo mean? Don't rob, right? Don't violently rob someone. But al Peter Sheba'al Peh, Leisigzo means don't do anything to damage another person. So Rabbeinu Yaina is clearly telling us that Leisigzo includes the Isser to be mazik to damage another person. Clear in Rabbeinu Yaina, and the reason why I'm preferring this, if you could say that, I'm choosing this one to speak about, is because if you look in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, in the beginning of Hilchos Nizkei Mammon, the Alter Rebbe seems to be saying a similar point. Alter Rebbe says like this: Asur lahazik mammon chaverei afilu al das l'shalim. Quoting the Rambam we said earlier, one is forbidden. You're not allowed to damage another person's property, even if you're going to say, I'll compensate, I'll pay you back. Why? What's the kemoi? Just like it's forbidden to steal, so too it's forbidden to be mazik. Seems like Rabbeinu Yaina, right? That the Isser to damage is really a derivative, is really a prat in the Isser of Leisigzo. So that's the first nekuda, the nekuda of the Isser to be mazik. That's point number one. Point number two, I want to discuss a little bit the famous chakira of the Achrayim, when a person's money damages. So just to give an example of a person's money damaging, we have the first Mishnah, Bava Kama, gives us a few examples. Shar, bar, and hever. Mava, we don't know. Mava might be Adam, we'll see. But shar, bar, and hever, which is a person's ox, a person's animal, nowadays a person's dog maybe, a person's pet. Bar is a pit, hever is fire, right? And all of these things, a person is obligated, the mazik must pay for any damage that his property does. And his property includes his bar, his pit, and his... Beautiful. So now, there is a famous chira in the Achrayim. Why is it? What is the nature of this tashlumin, of this payment that a person must pay when his money damages? Here's the chira. This chakira is presented by the Even HaEzel, Rabbi Bisser Zalman Meltzer, and the Chidush Reb Shimon Yehuda HaKohen and Reb Shimon Shkop. And this is the chakira. The chakira is, when a person has to pay for the damages that his property does, is it because he was negligent in protecting negligent in guarding his property. For example, he allowed, like we said from the Rambam, he allowed his shirt to roam free, his ox to roam free, knowing the aggressive tendencies of his animal. He allowed it to roam free. Or because he was Peshe and the Shmira, or because it's his mom and it belongs to him. What does that mean? So to give it a nafkamina will be mamchesh de'inyan. Nafkamina would be, I think this is the nafkamina that Reb Shimon brings in the beginning. I'm not sure I got it right, but I think this is what he says. He says, for example, if a person gives over the protection of his animal, or he gives his animal or his pet to his little child to walk, right? And the child is not capable of guarding it, right? So essentially he was paisheya, he was negligent in guarding his animal. But then he was mafkir, right? He rendered ownerless his animal. He said, you know what? It's running around free, I don't want it anymore. I can't deal with it anymore. I'm not interested, someone else could take my dog. So he was mafkir his dog. And then his dog goes and it damages, or his shar goes and damages, right? So at that moment, on the one hand, he was paisheya in the shmira. He was very negligent, right? He allowed his animal to be held and to be, looked after by someone who's incapable of protecting it, by a katan. But on the other hand, is it his money? It's not his money anymore, he was mafkir. So that would be the nafkamina. If the reason why you're chayav to pay when your money damages is because you were negligent in the shmira, here too, he was negligent in the shmira. But if the reason why you're chayav to pay was because it's your money, here it's not his money, he was mafkir it. That would be the classic nafkamina. There's many more nafkaminas, practical halachic nafkaminas, and also mostly nafkaminas in lamdas. When you're learning in yeshiva, so the Rosh Yeshivas use this chkira basically, and every other daf they're using it to explain something, right? It's the classic chkira of Masechtas Baba Kama. It's Mustama and Kuntres Yisayis v'chakiris. They have it over there. But anyways, now the Rebbe, ostensibly, l'chayra, the Rebbe brings the chkira on L'kutei Sichos in Parshas in Chelik Vav. Isaf is the Parshas Mishpatin. L'chayra, the Rebbe brings the chkira. But I want to say that perhaps the Rebbe actually is presenting the chkira in a different way from the Rosh Yeshivas than I said before. And first I'm going to say what's difficult about this chkira, and then I'll explain why the Rebbe's presentation of this chkira, if you're ma'ayin and the way the Rebbe words it solves this issue. So we mentioned earlier from the Rambam that a person is not allowed to be gerim damage. A person is not allowed to be gerim damage. But the shaila is, we know that grama ben izak and pater. What does grama ben izak and pater means? It means that in that instance that we mentioned before, where the person takes away the kar muksasis, they take away the cushions and the pillows, allowing indirectly the owner's kalim to break, right? They'll be pater. So even though it's an isra, as the Rambam mentioned earlier, but they're pater, right?
Even if that was his intention?
Yeah, grama ben izakin is pater. That's the halacha. Grama ben izakin is pater. So now let's compare the two cases. Let's compare the case of taking away the kar muksasis, the cushions and the pillows, and in the case of a shur damaging, an ox damaging, right? When a person takes away the kar muksasis, and like you're asking, it's like the most direct, indirect way of damaging, right? It's like the most obvious thing that if you pull away the cushions, the kalim are going to break. And yet we say you're pater. But when it comes to your shar damaging, getting out of control, right, which is much more indirect compared to that other case, right? Probably wasn't even his intention. I'm sure it wasn't his intention. He doesn't have to pay money, right? So, nevertheless, you're chayev. First Mishnah, Baba Kama, ki yigach sharei the psukim in the Torah, Parshas Mishpatim, you're chayev. How do we explain that? How do we explain heder hashmir, not protecting your animal is much less, right? Is much more grama, put it that way, than removing the kar muksasis, they're removing the cushions, and yet in the case of your animal damaging or your money damaging, you're chayev. In the case of taking away the kar muksasis, you're pater.
The animal's yours.
Huh?
Animal's yours.
Okay, one sec, we have to get to the chkira for a bit. Yeah, but there's a tzad to say in the chkira that the reason why you're chayev is because you were paishe and the shmira. According to that tzad, how do we explain the phenomenon that on the one hand, when it comes to removing the kar muksasis, you're pater, but when I get to the shar, you're chayev. Mozmed zago, so we must say like you're saying, that it's not possible that the reason why a person has to pay when his animal damages is because, something fell over here, the reason why he has to pay is because he was paishe and the shmira, because that's classic grama. That's grama. So it's not like what the Rosh Yeshiva say. The reason why, I'm going to say soon what the Rebbe says, how the Rebbe presents the Chkira. But the reason why a person has to pay when a share damages is, let's think for a moment about the Isra of Grama. You're potter when you're a Goyrem Nezek and directly you damage. So when are you Chayev? When you directly damage. An animal is directly damaging. Now the animal is not capable of paying, right? So we say the owner pays. We'll get into that in a moment. When do you have to pay? You do have to pay when you damage. And a share is not when there is a maisa of somebody going and damaging another person's property. That's when you have to pay. When there's a real intentional damage, you're really taking away something from someone else. You're not grama, you're not indirect, you're directly taking something from someone else. And all of the examples the Mishnah says in the beginning of Baba Kama, of Shur, Bar, Mava, Hever, the kavanah of the Mishnah is, those that are learning it, maybe will appreciate what I'm saying now, but the kavanah of the Mishnah over there is to tell us that each one of the examples the Torah gives, the examples of a person's money that are damaging, in all cases, the perpetrator of the damage is a damager by nature. That's its essence. That's what it is. That's what it does. The shar is a mazik by nature. The boyer is a davar amazik. The aish is a davar amazik. So there has to be a direct damage, right? Now the question is, so be'etzem, if the shar was a conscious being that was capable of paying, you would say to the shar, you have to pay. The problem is that the share is not capable of paying. He's not capable of paying. So the owner has to pay. Why does the owner have to pay? Here comes the question of why we link the animal to, or the person's property, we link it to the owner. Either because the owner was paisheya in the shmira, because he was negligent in protecting his animal. Why should you be chayev for what your animal does? Your animal should be chayev. For your animal, it's not grumba. Right? Why should you be chayev for your animal's chiyuv? So the Gemara says chiyuv of the shur. The answer is because you were negligent. That's one side. Or the other side is, why should you be chayev for what your shur did? Because it's your money. And therefore you're responsible for any actions that your money does as well. So that's what the Rebbe, that's the way the Rebbe poses the chkira. That's the way the Rebbe says the chkira. In other words, the question is not why the owner is chayev. In other words, the question is not why the owner is chayev. The question is why the chiyuv of the shur is transferred to the owner. It's a subtle difference. It's a subtle difference. If you're in yeshiva and you're doing these things every day, it's easy to grasp what I'm saying. That's the way the Rebbe presents. Now there's a Bach. There's a very interesting Bach. The Bach says, and I don't remember the lashon. I don't have the lashon of the Bach in front of me, but the Bach Mamish says these lashonis. He says that the one who is chayev to pay for damages is the shur. That's who has to pay. Because for the shur, it's not grama. The shur has to pay. The shur can't pay, so you have to pay, right? And the example that he gives is an afkamina la'alocha. He says that, for instance, when somebody is a child and their shur damages, person's child, a child has a shur, as an animal, as a pet, and it does damage. He says when the child grows older, he'll have to pay for the damages the animal did. Why? Because really, who's the source of the chiyuv? Who really has to pay? The shur. The shur can't pay. So you have to link the chiyuv, so you transfer the obligation to the owner. Now, the owner happens to be a child now. So when it grows older, you give the chiyuv to the child. Well, that's point number 2. Then I get to the definition of tashlum nizikin. Point number 3, and I'm going to say this very, very bekitzer because it's almost zman. Point number 3 is like this: the beginning of the Masechta, the Gemara says, "Avis miklal dika tuldus." The Gemara says, "Asher ba'avis abavis nizikin, asher ba'abar va'amave va'hever." What is the av of shur? The av of shur, for example, is when an animal goes and gores. That is the example the Torah uses. An animal goes and gores, you have to pay. Tam muad. What is a toda? A toda, the Gemara says, negifa, neshicha, rebitza, be'ita, if an animal acts in other violent ways, right? It shoves, it pushes, it kicks. Those are all derivatives. Those are all what's called todas. Avis mikal dika todas. Now, when you get to Shabbos, we also know that there's a concept of avis and todas by Shabbos, right? Avis milacha, zereya and chayresh, right? As the Mishnah continues to say, Masechta Shabbos. So, for example, an av would be zereya, planting, right? A tolda, or an av would be zereya or chayresh, planting or plowing, right? A tolda would be mashkinas, watering the plants. It's a good question that the Gemara might cut in the beginning, if it's a tolda of zereya, or if it's a tolda of chayresh. But it's a tolda. Watering plants is a tolda. In Masechta Shabbos, in Masechta Shabbos, the Perek Bamet Tainin, the Gemara over there says, where do we know that there's a concept of Tuldos? How do you know? Maybe the Torah says only Zereh and Cherish itself is Asr. How do you know you're not allowed to water your plants? Maybe you're only not allowed to plant. So the Gemara over there says, because it says, Me'achas meheina, there's a special limud from a pasuk that there are Tuldos to the Avis. In Masechtas Baba Kama, where we also know, as we said before, that there are Avis and Tuldos, no such limud is given. What's the pshat? What's the pshat? Is there a rule that when Torah tells us an Isser, then we assume that there's also similar activities to the Isser that are also forbidden as Tuldos, or not? By Shabbos, it seems like we need a special limud. Ma'achas me'ena. By Baba Kam, by Nezikin, it seems like we don't. So what's happening? So the Bart is Azai. So there's the Shita Mekubetza says, and B'Shem the Mari Katz, the Shita Mekubetza says that by Shabbos, that generally speaking, there is a rule that they would say there are Tuldos. When Torah says that something is Asr, the rule would be that Misvara, I would say that similar activities to that primary Isser that the Torah mentioned would also be forbidden. Why by Shabbos do I need a special limud? By Shabbos you need a special limud because Torah restricted and relegated the Isser of Melacha to things that were done in the Mishkan. Torah says, what is the definition of Melacha? It says, Leisasa Melacha. What is a Melacha? That which was done in the Mishkan. So we restricted the concept of Melacha, the term Melacha, to whatever happened in the Mishkan. So I would have thought, you're limiting it, so you're limiting it. I can't learn anything else. So we have a limud that there are Tuldos. What comes out from the Shita B'Kobetz is that B'Pashtos, there is, when the Torah, as I said before, when you have a primary Isser mentioned in the Torah, similar activities are also Asr as Tuldos, as we see from Baba Kama, that without any makar, we assume that there's Tuldos. Not only is a shar goring chayev, when your shar gores, even when it pushes and shoves, which is a Tulda. The issue is that there's a Taisus in Chayres, and I'm going to finish in a second. The issue is that there's a Taisus in Chayres and Daf Chafei, that Taisus over there brings many rayas, that's not the case. That when Torah says that something is Asr, we don't assume that there are Tuldos. For example, what he's discussing over there is, he says, Lo yisagas b'vchertzei necha, you're not allowed to shear. Shear means you're not allowed to, with a special keli, with a special scissors and whatever kelim they use, to shear, to take off and to shave the wool of a sheep, for example, right? If the sheep is a b'char, you're not allowed to do that to a b'char. Lo yisagas b'vchertzei necha, you're not allowed to do that. Gziza. Right? There's a tolda for geizes. As we learn by Shabbos, gziza, shearing, is also a malacha. What's the tolda? The tolda is not doing it with the special tool, but doing it with your hands. That's a tolda, tailish. Right? And Taisus is meichiach for many places that there is no, that by Bechar, we don't say the tolda is Asr. You don't assume that there's a tolda. Seems like the Shita Mekubetzes and Taisus are saying opposite things. Shita Mekubetzes is saying that the general rule is that there are toldas, right? Only by Shabbos we need a special limud for whatever reason, as we said before. And the Taisus is saying fakert, that there are no toldas in general, for many places. So there's a vart from the Rosh Yeshiva, Baruch Shem Schneerson, the Chibiner. He says that there's no machlek. Avnei Nezer understands that it's actually a machlekes between the two, between Taisus and Shita Mekubetzes, but he says this nishtazeh. He says that there's a big difference between Isurim and the Torah that are really Isurim because that what is wrong with the Isur is not the act itself, but its effect. So for example, why did the Torah say you're not allowed to do Charisha and Zri on Shabbos? Because the technical activity of smoothing the ground is what's difficult. Or the result. When a person plows, they're changing the form, they're accomplishing something. What is the definition of malacha? Accomplishing something, right? You're changing something. You're creating something new, right? Formerly, before you did the charisha, before you plowed, the land was in a certain state, was not ready to be sowed, was not ready to receive plants. And now that you plowed, you change the ground. You change the texture. That's a malacha. So it's not about it's about what the result, the consequence of your act, the technical act of moving the shovel or whatever, however you plow, that's the issue of the malacha, the result of the act. It's not the moving the shovel that bothers the Torah. And so therefore, but then there are other Isurim. There are other Isurim where what the issue with the Isur is the very technical act of what you're doing. For example, yeah? What's the issue with doing with shearing the b'char, that itself is the issue. Taking a scissor and putting it on an animal. Right? Not that the animal now doesn't have any hair on it. That's the issue. The pu'ula itself is problematic, not the nifal. Says Rebbe Shimon, so that's what Shita Mekubetz is saying. Marikatz. He's saying like this: when the Isra of the Torah is, it's not about the pu'ula that you're doing. It's about the effect, the consequence. So then there are ovis and then there are toldas. For sure there are toldas. Because the tolda, as much as the av is changing, is changing something, right? Has a nifl, has a consequence that makes it a malacha. So does the tolda have something that makes it a malacha. Watering the ground also accomplishes a promotion of growth, just like Zereah does. What is wrong with planting a seed in the ground on Shabbos? The planting of the seed, or that you're promoting growth, which is a malacha, which is creating. That's Asro on Shabbos. Promoting growth. Oh, so when you water ground, you're also promoting growth. So b'meila, there's no reason to say that the tolda shouldn't be chayav. The av is chayav, also the tolda. Why shouldn't there be a tolda? Because it's never about the pu'ula. It's about the accomplishment, which the tolda also shares exactly like the av does. But when it comes to isurim that are all about the pu'ula itself, the very act of, for example, shearing the b'char, so then there's no tolda. Torah said that shearing is asur. Why should anything else be asur? Why should tailish be asur? The pu'ula of cutting it off is what's asur, not shearing. They might shear the same effect, right? They might share the same consequence, but it's not the consequence that Torah was concerned with. It was the actual pu'ula, the activity of cutting the hair off of the b'char. It's not up to us to decide when the isurim are about the nifl, when about the pu'ula. That's already, we have to receive that. It's not, we can't just come up with svaras on our own. But anyways, this helps us appreciate very much the beginning of the Baba Kama, what the question over there is. Till they're saying Keitzben or Lav Keitzben, but it's late and we'll... Yeah, but there's no klal. There's no, by Shabbos there's a klal leisasa malacha. Yeah. So there's a question, but I get the nizikin. There's a question about nizikin because Torah doesn't give a klal. By Shabbos Torah says a klal leisasa malacha. So the rest, the obvious and the toldos are hechetimtzis. But the isra is the malacha shabbazeh. But it doesn't say anywhere that there's a klal not to be mazik. There's a klal that when you're mazik you damage. It's a big question. Yeah, no, the example of share, right? Okay, we'll tell the second Gates, Lav Gates, but it's a big question. Anyways, it's a long question. Say there. All right, go.